lots of things in life come down to training. And one of the things we say is you never rise to the occasion. You always fall to the lowest level of your training. So like, think of our kids, right? If we don't prepare them by teaching them how to use a drill, or we don't prepare them by teaching how to avoid getting hit or fished on a website, or we don't teach them, general boundaries and skill sets, they enter into a world that's moving really fast.
Welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast. This is the podcast for dads of all seasons to learn the things that they can do and engage so that they can go and equip the next generation for success. Here we sit down with everyday dads just like you to learn from their story, get inspired, and then start getting after it. So we invite you to join in, see what you can take away from this story, and apply to your life on your journey to becoming the Skilled Dad. Hey guys, and welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast. My name is Zach Reeser. I'm your host. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. If this is your 28th or 29th time joining us, welcome back. Really excited about today with this gentleman that you see here or will hear here shortly, Mr. Chuck Ferry. And Chuck, I'm going to tell a little bit of a backstory as to how we got connected. And really, we've had a lot of conversations before hitting the record button today. But he was on a show called Whiskey Wednesday, and you should look it up on YouTube under the Gear and Beer Show, Whiskey Wednesday. And if you had heard an episode way back, Mr. Brian Graff was on there, and Chuck had joined him. And Chuck was telling some of his story, and my ears perked up. And I reached out to Brian. I said, "I've got to talk to this guy. I've got to talk to him." And we'll get into that here shortly. But Chuck is a retired firefighter, and we'll hear some of that story. And he's also the founder and CEO of Forcible, which focuses on both training and equipping our first responders with the right equipment so that they can step in the line of duty, get things done safely, as well as more effectively. So hopefully I said that right, Chuck. But thanks so much for joining here and being on the Skilled Dad Podcast.
I'm super excited, and thanks so much for the invitation, Zach. It's exciting to be able to talk with you. Like you said, we've been chatting offline a bunch. It's just good to align with other people who love a tool culture, right? And a desire to like build stuff, even if we screw it up the first time.
If we don't screw it up the first time, we're either a savant or got really lucky.
I'll go with number two, lucky. We guessed well.
We guess
For
well.
sure.
Well, the thing that for those that don't know, which is everyone, the thing that perked my ears up when I was watching you on Whiskey Wednesday with Brian there is a story about your grandfather and how he had started an upholstery business. And for probably most everybody that don't know, I actually stepped in to take over an upholstery business that my grandfather started like 30 years ago. And in that mix, you also started talking about your kids and your family and some of the things that drove you to make some changes with kind of your path. And that's what really perked my ear up. But we have that upholstery in common, which is some people might not even know what that is. They're Googling it right now. And if you are and you're driving, pull over, wait for it. Um, but speaking of first, like today, I was telling Chuck earlier, I started my first actual chair to upholster. So, front office is different than doing it. And and half was really good and the other half was garbage. So, we'll send pictures to you later, Chuck. But
Well, that's exactly the way we did with the first door. The first door was made because I knew what I was doing. The first door was made because I had identified myself personally that I had not practiced enough, and nor did I have enough operational experience forcing doors in the fire service to be consistently good at something, right? In the fire service, I really desired to be excellent in my job. I think most firefighters come into the fire service with that in mind. I had spent 20 years as a paramedic, 10 years in private ambulance service, and then 10 years with Palo Alto before I got on the truck. And when I got on the truck, one of the things you do in truck work is you work what's called forcible entry, which is to enter a building forcibly, i.e., the doors are locked, the windows are locked, everything's locked, the doors are down and locked, everything's locked, right? So we have to be able to get into that building because if we don't know how to get into the building, the fire grows, right? Fire doubles
Mhm.
every minute, right? So our fire growth is continuing to grow. So every minute that we're not able to get through a door is increasing the fire growth and it's increasing victim survival rates.
Mm.
And so wanting to be good at that, I built my first door. And I swear, if I had a picture to pull up and your audience could see it, they'd laugh. I mean, I have an old picture. It's hysterical what I came up with first, but it worked, right? And the funny thing was that it worked. It worked well enough that everybody in my department was like, "Hey, how do I force that?" Like, we really realized that we weren't that great at forcing doors, and so it created over the next. So this was back in 2009. So in 2010 we incorporated, but really started training around 2012 after realizing I didn't really know a really good system to force a door, right?
Mhm.
And so as I did the training piece, that made me continue to work on the door. And so, like you're saying, like the first time you do something, it is it is your best attempt. If anybody's out there wondering, should I try it? You should try something because if you never try it, you
Yes.
never know where it's going to go. And had I not picked up a welder from my grandfather, the upholsterer,
Mhm.
Fred Eaglehawk was one of my dearest memories in my mind. When this gentleman passed away, he left me 10 grand and I bought a welder and a tube bender. Right. So he's wondering, was that investment well spent on that grandkid? Right. Yeah. Cause I think I got that in a 72 Bronco, which I really wish I still had because that'd be worth a fortune. But,
Yes, it would.
yeah, but I built that 72 Bronco into a rock crawler and I went out and drove it all over the Rubicon and stuff, had a great time. Right. But if I hadn't bought that welder and tried to weld something, then 10 years later, when I got on the truck and saw a door, I wouldn't have been able to weld a door together. And then I wouldn't have been able to eventually build a company. See, we have to start somewhere. And even if we suck at it, we got to give it a shot
Mm.
because we don't know what opportunity that's going to open up for us years down the road. And that to me has been one of the things I've really realized is how if we don't take the opportunity when we get it, if we don't make the opportunity at times, we might lose out on something in 10 years we don't even see right now.
Mhm. That's that's so huge and prominent and things that happen down the road, both between stories, personal experiences, like, you might not know why something shakes down the way it does or happens the way it does, but if we don't put ourselves out there to kinda be open to messing something up, we're not gonna learn anything and not be prepared for the future. No, I love that. Um, it's a little tricky when, like, the first round that you have is being a dad when we step into it. My first kid, he did okay. He's still doing okay, so we haven't messed anything totally up, but stepping in, I actually love the and I wanna hear more about, just your story as you as a dad, and I've got a few questions as we just go, and we'll kinda take this thing where it goes. But I really like what you said about, what happens if you don't enter, and this might be a stretch here, but if things are locked and you don't find a way to get through, the fire grows, right? Not good things
Yes.
happen. And part of this podcast, part of the show, whatever you want to call it, conversations is about, hey, we got to step in there and we've got to get in front of whatever danger is there, or the things that we can do to equip our kids so that the fire doesn't grow and we don't let it kind of take off in a direction that we otherwise may have been able to go and make better. My words are
Right.
escaping me today, but I like
No,
like
no,
that.
I think you're on the right track. So if lots of things in life come down to training. And one of the things we say is you never rise to the occasion. You always fall to the lowest level of your training. So like think of our kids, right? if we don't prepare them by teaching them how to use a drill, or we don't prepare them by teaching how to avoid getting hit or fished on a website, or we don't teach them, general boundaries and skill sets, they enter into a world that's moving really fast and it can be really overwhelming. The social media part really deeply concerns me.
Mhm.
I think kids are overwhelmed by it. It it's an unrealistic thing to look at. And like we have a social media page for our company,
Mhm.
but like numbers and likes and stuff cannot be the priority. We're sharing information. That's all we're doing. We're not out here to make, we're out here to expose ourselves. But the problem for a kid is like they look at how many likes they've gotten in the first 30 seconds,
Mm.
the first 30 minutes, and they start judging themselves by that. And you really have to take the time to train your kids and not think that is where my value's at,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
My value is in who I am, who God created me to be, and what I get to do with this life that I've been given. And if we don't teach our kids that, we're really setting them up um, for a difficult time, because I think there's a lot of challenges out there. And I think training, regardless whether it's kids or firefighters, um, the firefighter space for us is like, okay, let's say the firefighter didn't know how to go through the door. Let's say
Mm.
there's somebody behind that door. Let's say somebody else comes in there and they open that door, and that patient or that victim is now unrevivable. They have died, right? How lousy does that firefighter feel knowing that another firefighter was able to get through that door, but he or she was not able to? That's not acceptable.
Mm.
That's the training problem inside. Um, I won't say that's inside the fire service. The fire service does a wonderful job of making sure everybody's qualified. But what they don't always do is make sure they have something for them to train on. They do
Mm.
initial training. They don't always do long-term training. They don't always add the training so that it becomes more difficult. And so we're trying to address these issues inside this piece. But again, we have to practice. We have to practice often, right? This is why they argue that like meditation and prayer matter, but they don't
Mhm.
matter if you do it at Easter and Christmas. They just don't
Right.
matter,
Right.
because you've built a habit, and that habit has made you a more peaceful person. And that habit has made you more able to understand other people's perspectives. And I think that if we don't train ourselves well, it doesn't affect us the first 10 years, but that next 10 years, we're all over the map and we don't know
Mhm.
why. And because we didn't invest in ourselves in the first 10 years, I don't know if we're as prepared to invest in ourselves in the next. And everybody's different. So I won't say that, that's a blanket, but I feel like if you're not pushing yourself to grow into some area that you need. For me, it's prayer and meditation. Those are two of the things I really need to work on.
Mm.
And so I'm
Mm.
trying, right? So, but if I don't put the time in, I can guarantee you it's going to be, it's going to be lost. And then I lose my mind as a peaceful person. And I don't want to do that.
Right. Time and reps. Time and reps.
Reps, baby. That is the game right there. Do reps. Like you with your building the
Everywhere.
chair, right?
Everywhere. Yep.
Right. If you build 100, I guarantee you the 100th looks a lot different than the first. Cause I'll tell you right now, our doors, we were laughed at because we used wood doors, literally laughed at, told that will never work. Now we have the best door on the planet and it's still a wood door, but we have reinforced that thing with AR 450 plates so much. It's a beast. And so, but you have to learn that, right?
Yeah.
You have to have
Yeah.
people that come against you and say you're wrong. And then you have to prove them wrong, or you at least have to show that what you're doing has value, right? And so
Yeah.
hopefully you can.
Well, that's something you said right there. And as for those that do listen to this podcast, they know that this thing kind of takes a life of its own. I personally like that. People keep listening, so we haven't lost too many yet. But um, the other thing too about, and I'd love to get your perspective on this with your service as a firefighter, um, and something you just said, like you've got to get people as well to kind of either point in the right direction or kick you in the rear to keep you going, or someone that's not necessarily your spouse or significant other that is there, both encouraging and kind of kicking you in the pants, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that it seems to me would, because I'm not a firefighter, have not been, but there's kind of this internal. I mean, the trust is going to be superior in what and how you're going to operate as a team. I would imagine you've got this kind of brotherhood that you've got going on. And then outside of that, you've got to have people in that circle that you trust you, and that you can have that accountability buzzword. But it is there. Like one, two is one and one is none, as a couple of my buddies say. And that is, that's one of those things. You can go get reps all day long, but what happens if maybe we're thinking we're doing the right reps, but maybe our form is wrong, and someone else can kind of give us, insight on that. But is that fair? Is that fair? Kind of say like kind of the accountability, the brotherhood side that you have in the community of first responders.
Yeah, I would say that we very much are, I like to say open-minded in the sense that like we don't believe that, especially in the forcible entry space, that there's only one way, but we do believe that there's better ways. And
Mm,
so the beautiful thing about our community, especially the piece that we do, it's what we call breaching and barbecue, is we get to learn from them and they learn from us, and we all get something new out of it. And that's been really neat with our law enforcement because we work with a lot of SWAT, narcotics, different teams, and these guys come in there and they've got kind of their way of doing things in which we respect and we love, and we ask them to share that stuff with us to make do, and then we share with them some of the techniques we have, and then we try to see how we can cross train those two things together so we become even better, right? And
mhm,
so that kind of better together because we're both sharing our experiences and our and what's happened. I think that's a really important piece in this because I don't believe I can walk into a room and go, "Hey, listen, I know more than all of you." I think that's I think beyond being obviously just prideful and arrogant, I don't think it's possible. I know my operational area pretty well, and I've been around it enough to go, "Hey, I'm pretty good at this space." But for me to make the assumption I know your operational area, that's that's not even fair. And when I
right.
go out to do when we do training, even in the fire service, like one, you were talking a little bit, you went on there, you said something about accountability and the brotherhood. The brotherhood and the accountable in that piece, that's that's real glue. When
Mm,
you go out to events and you know that one of you could get seriously injured or killed, and you're relying on each other. I'm telling you, that is when you get done with that event, everybody comes out and everybody's in one piece. That's glue, right? That's the glue that
mhm,
holds us together and makes us take care of one another. Um, and when things go bad, it's glue too. Like even in your personal lives, we've had some really significant events that happened in Palo Alto where one of our really good friends, one of my friends who's still there, lost his son,
mm,
and I saw an entire fire department come together in a way that like it still awe-inspires me.
mm.
I saw them fix his house. I saw them support him. I saw them bring food. Like I saw things happen that uh, uh, just awe-inspiring. And it just becomes this really interesting community amongst first responders.
Mhm.
And they truly care about each other. And that's the best thing. And that's the thing I think that is really unique about the first responder community is that we eat dinner together, right? We solve all the world's
Right.
problems at the round table. We know that. Like that is our thing. And right, it just happens every time. But it is a place where we really do get to commune together, and that living together is just an amazing space.
Yeah.
Um, and it's sad because like what we're doing is we're not seeing as many people applying for the fire service anymore, which
Mm.
blows my mind because it's been such a great career. Um, but if you have a desire to like work with your hands, get out there and serve people, man, that is a great career. I can't speak enough to it.
How about if someone's not necessarily, and then we're kind of on the firefighter path here, but if someone's not necessarily looking for the career side of it, but from a volunteer perspective, how is kind of the volunteer experience versus kind of the career experience? What does that look like for somebody that's like, you know what? I've been thinking about it for a while. I've got my local fire departments. I've been looking at the opportunities to, do my part and volunteer. What are kind of give me some insight on that.
So I can't speak to the volunteer piece because I never was one, right? So that
Fair.
wasn't my space. And California has probably the least number of volunteer fire departments. But what I
Mm,
can say is this. Um, yeah, because if you look across the country, we don't have a ton of volunteers over here. But we do have some small communities that utilize it. I know there's one actually near my house called in Rescue. What I will say is this: if you're curious about what the fire service looks like and what it's like to be part of that camaraderie, become a volunteer. Go out there and learn some skills. The cool thing, and also the time that's the piece that starts to take up a lot of time, if I understand this correct, volunteers are currently held to the same standards as full-time firefighters.
Mm,
That means you're about to get all the training a standard firefighter does. You have to get your firefighter one and your firefighter two. So that's going to give you a lot of training. It's also going to give you a lot of exposure to different areas of life, not only the firefighting side, but most agencies, I would imagine, even volunteer will require you to do some type of first aid or EMT, emergency medical technician training. And so if you're interested even in medicine, this can be an interesting entry point to start to ask yourself, is this the space I want to be in? Because as a paramedic, I did a lot of work with fire departments before I was part of the fire department. And I found that I really enjoyed that medicine piece. And so sometimes for people who are interested in medicine, not just in the fire service, this can be a place where they can join in. And then yeah, I think that ties up. I don't want to speak too much to the volunteer departments because I just don't have the experience in that space.
yeah.
I do know you have a phenomenal networking space in there, which I think
Mhm.
is an advantage. I think that the biggest takeaway is that you get exposure to what they actually do. So if you're thinking this may or may not be what I want to do, I think it's a good option for you. If there's high schoolers out there looking at this, they should be thinking about Explorer programs. So most high schools or local junior colleges have an Explorer program or a fire academy or fire classes. It's a great way to get exposure to these. And if you're interested in law enforcement, same thing in junior college and same thing in high school. There's an Explorer program for law enforcement. We support our local one and bring
Mhm.
doors up during their regional training days. So that's a really neat option for people to look into the fire service and police service.
I love it. I know we have a lot of volunteer departments around where I am here in Nashville. So
Well, let
no,
me
it's
say
just
thank you to them.
what's
I,
that?
I deeply appreciate all our volunteers. We
Yeah,
routinely give discounts to volunteer fire departments because we recognize these guys are doing it. They're not getting paid and they're trying to raise money to make things happen. So if we can ever help them, we will absolutely try to do so.
awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure I send this to a couple of my buddies that I know are involved.
Yeah, I would love to chat with them.
So you were over 20 years as a firefighter, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Um, being that we're on the Skill Dad podcast, I'm curious. You're staying with guys, waiting for, needing to respond. You're working. You've got that community. What did you learn during that period and or, tell me about some of your experience when you started having kids and what that looked like for you um as a firefighter and as a dad.
Sure. So I had my first child when I was 29, my son, Josh. And I was actually working full time as a paramedic on a paramedic ambulance, not in the fire service.
Mm,
And then after I had our daughter Juliana, uh, I actually started testing for the fire service and the police service actually at the same time. Um, the real deal
is
is,
that a form of like being bipolar? Because I know some police and firefighters don't always get along. I was glad to see you and Brian, talking, but I've heard that.
so it's a funny thing. I actually wanted to be a cop. My wife begged me not to be a cop. She had two friends. She had two or three friends back in LA. All of them were divorced from their law enforcement partners, and so this was one of those times that you have to have a very prayerful time with God and really ask yourself, okay, what are we doing? And so after I got hired by a police agency, and then I turned them down,
Mm,
um, believing that my wife might be right about me. I was pretty hard charging. I was not the most graceful person in the sense like I wasn't going to show you a lot of grace,
mm,
right? So she was really concerned about me being an officer, and so um, I look at life now, and there's part of me that still would have loved to do that side of the job. Because I came out of an 11 Bravo position in the military, right?
uh-huh.
So I was an infantry guy. So like, shoot, move, communicate. That was the deal, right? So I'm like, this is an easy flip over. And I've had multiple guys who meet me in the law enforcement side, like, why did you go to the fire? And it's like, at the end of the day, I went to fire. Probably due to a lot of prayer and just trying to listen to my wife and consider what our future would look like. And I honestly didn't know at the moment what everything would turn out to be. And so the day that I was supposed to start the academy for the police service, I got a call from Palo Alto Fire going, "Hey, you need to come over here and sign this interest card so we can put you on our list." And so interesting to see how God prevails in some of this stuff, and
Yeah.
it, it's frightening. I think I've gone off rail though.
No, you're good.
What
I
was the
threw you
question?
off rail. I threw you off
No,
rail by
it's
wondering how it worked out, kind of, interest in 2 paths that at least the
so
stigmas don't get along. But how did it impact you as a firefighter, your experience as a dad? Um, and I think
as a
that's kinda what I
dad,
wanna
right?
get
So yes, right, yeah. So that's where we're going. So I thought the fire service was wonderful because originally we worked a standard Kelly, which is a day on, a day off, a day on, a day off, a day on, and then 4 days off. But then you start working overtime and you end up when you come home, if you've been up for 24 hours and you've been dealing with people who have been dying or a fire or something like that, you're not
Mhm.
always the most graceful person. And what happened when I got hired was I was told, "Hey, man, you don't need to find another job. You'll just work overtime. That'll be your second job." And because the fire service had that was kind of the mindset. I
Mhm.
got it. I'm like, okay, cool. I can just do overtime here, and that's how I'll make my extra money to go buy whatever it is I feel like I need to have, right? So,
Right.
or pay whatever bills I got. What I found over time was that started to impact my time at home, and we wanted to homeschool our kids, and we did homeschool all of them through junior high. Actually, my youngest, she didn't go all the way through junior high. I think she had watched her sister and brother go through it. She's like, I'm just gonna leave her at junior high. But wanting to be engaged with your kids is hard, and if you're um, what the studies are telling us right now is that it takes a firefighter almost 24 hours once they get off duty to channel down, to come
Mhm.
out of what they call station yellow. There's three different stations. It's covered in On Combat, the book. But the idea is that you're kind of keyed up because you've been at work. You're constantly waiting to be called out. You're ready for that response, right? So when you get home, you have to kind of key down, and it takes you only 24 hours. And then they say that the 24 hours before you leave, you're keying back up, right?
Mhm.
So if you're off for 4 days, you're keying down one day and you're keying up the other day, right? You're really only there presently, really getting your head wrapped around things for 2 days. When I started to realize this kind of stuff, it was lucky I was realizing this while I was going through the process of building Forcible Entry back in 2008, 2009. It dawned on me that I could build something at home, maybe that I could then sell to the fire service, i.e., our door systems.
Mhm.
And then I wouldn't have to work overtime because if you start stacking days upon days, the defrag time when you get home can take even longer. And
Mhm.
I wanted to be present. And that was one of the reasons I think I moved into this. Hey, I'm just gonna weld on my days. I'll be home. I can kind of I got it. You ever heard that term flow?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I really felt like I was in flow when I was fabricating. I'm like, I would get lost in that time. And then my wife would yell at me and be like, "Hey, come on out. Like, we're gonna have dinner," or something like it. So then you're present, right? If they need you for something, you're present. It also helped my son a couple times because he's like, "Hey, I have a project we have to have done by tomorrow." I'm like, "Let's go fabricate something. Like, let's go make something."
I'm your
So,
guy.
yeah, I forgot we do this, right? So it was a really fun piece. And then I just felt like it gave me an opportunity to put my hands to work doing something differently. And the weight of being a paramedic over time can weigh on you. And so being able to be in a place where I wasn't dealing with people who were sick, I wasn't dealing with somebody else's emergency, and I could just build something that I really enjoyed was really meaningful for me. And it was neat because, and what's really interesting to me is my son didn't want to be a firefighter. He wanted to come work with me as a fabricator. So through his eyes, he saw a better life in one side than the other, which
Mm,
I find interesting, right?
yeah.
I don't want to say that the fire service drains you. It doesn't, but it does. There is a part of it that because of the nature of the work we do, it it is burdensome at times, right? And you try and unfrag all that stuff out of your head, but you carry that stuff and you
Yep.
carry it,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the rest of your life. And so we're finding this stuff out in the mental health space. And so for me, I'm actually really happy that and trust me, it wasn't because I was so smart that I saw this all coming. I'm like, I just think this is fun. It's a way for me to go have a good time. So I would just go build doors, right? So that's what I did. So
I love it. You know, that study is interesting, and on combat. I've not read that one, but I think you and I had talked about it before. But
it was Dave
if you're
Grossman.
white, yellow, red, it's good for anybody to know. Is it the same? Um, but one thing that you had said about that 24-hour kind of stand down is, if anybody here that's listening is a business traveler, and my question is, does that sound familiar? Because there are similar studies that it takes, unless you're doing a ton, maybe you're just so used to it, sleeping in a hotel room the first night, it's a new facility, new place, same kind of deal. So, um,
No, you're on to something there. And I just got back from a month of travel, and I went to two different conferences, and then I was at two different offsites doing training. And I will tell you, you're absolutely on to something there. I would be curious what that would be, how that would look. Because when you're out there doing sales, you're out there pushing, that takes a lot of mental and emotional energy. And I realized how tired I was coming back from some of that stuff. So
mhm,
you only know what you know, right? And so, it made me appreciate what other people do. I have a buddy that does sales. He travels a bunch and he's like, dude, I'm wasted. And I'm like, I get it now. I totally see why.
yeah, yeah, and if you're traveling, um, multiple time zones, same deal.
Right.
Because well, I guess I technically had all the time zones. And so I was in that sales world, loved it. Um, but similar deal. I mean, it took a while to unwind, but you're, typically up late. You're always on, whether you're with a team, if you're managing a team, like you're focused on all those pieces. Um, so, kind of similar. And there is an article if you're kind of curious about that. There's a study. This is older, but it's called The Darker Side of Hypermobility. And it was done in Europe for people that were constantly traveling, along with the gamification that happens with point statuses and tier statuses and all that from all the different, chains that you stay with or who you fly with. But anyway, there's a lot of things that can drain us. And so, always
Yeah.
looking at the things that we've learned that help us then be present. Sometimes it's making a change.
Right.
And then sometimes it's just being aware of it so that you can step into, tackling it, whatever your individual scenario might be.
No, absolutely. It's interesting. So Dave Grossman, he was I want to say an Army Colonel Ranger, ended up teaching at West Point. Uh, he speaks in his book on combat. And so white is basically just kind of just mellow. You're safe in your own home, right? Yellow is on alert. We are working. We are, engaging in things, and our heart rate is typically below 120. This is actually seeing the heart rate stuff. And he cites another book. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but that was where a lot of the heart rate studies were done. The zone red is actually above 140
Mm,
beats per minute, and you start to lose fine motor control. And then situation black is where you've lost all motor control and you think you're going to die. And so the interesting thing that I think of is that even if you're traveling, right, you're releasing cortisol, adrenaline in your system all the time.
right.
One of the things that's an advantage to the fire service when we go to a fire, right, we do a lot of very hard work, which is exactly what your body was designed for, to feel fear and to either fight or flight, right? So
Hmm.
we see a fire, we engage, we do all this work, and our heart rate blows up, and we blow out all this adrenaline, right?
Right.
It's actually a more healthy piece. Now, the unplugging and coming down off of it once we get home, that can be a little bit different. But the thing that concerns me for somebody who travels, like a police officer. A police officer engages in combat potentially, shoots a person, right? And there's no fight. And then they have 1,000 whatever milligrams of adrenaline in their system and they can't unprocess it, right? There's no workload after it. Now, if they're in a fight, obviously there's a massive workload there. And I won't pretend to be a cop or know what they do. I do understand though that they have to process all that adrenaline, but take that just one step over a little bit. Your sales guy who is not working out and not training and not doing anything for himself physically carries all that same adrenaline,
Mhm.
and maybe he has a big sale or maybe he gets busted out, right? And he's like, he loses the big sale. And either way, he's either got cortisol adrenaline he's dealing with. Does he go and work out and blow all that out of his system by running or biking or lifting something heavy and just getting all that adrenaline out and all that stress out? And I think there's a real need for people to identify that I need this time and got to get rid of that because, they say sitting is the new smoking, right? Like we can't be sitting all the time, right? We've
Right.
got to be out there and
Right.
be active in our world. And so I encourage the guys who are listening to this, hey, do something at the end of those days to like blow off that adrenaline, get it out of your system before you go home because it will actually help you decompress. I hit the gym at least 3 days a week on my way home from work because I deal with a lot of stuff at work and I want to go to the gym. I want to punch something. I want to lift something heavy. I want to do something like that. And so I can go do that. And it helps me to bring that adrenaline level down. Um, I just think it's super important for people to consider that for their own health.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not just about like to your point. I think there's some education for me to do before I like really speak on it. But it's not just looking good and feeling good. It's the why behind it and what it does. It's what you said, kind of blowing off the chemistry involved in it. Like there's an important factor there um, to look into. It's not just I need to work out. It's the why. It's just like anything. Why do you need to do it? What does it do for you? And what are the moving parts as to why it's important? So I'm gonna look into that. That's really good. And if you don't
I'll
have a
give you,
gym, do push-ups. Herschel Walker.
yeah. Here's the deal. It's actually there's two chemicals we deal with most of the time. Adrenaline, that's what brings our heart rate up.
Mhm.
Cortisol, that's what makes us get fat. Basically, it's a stress hormone, right? And those two fight each other.
That's why I'm not standing up right now.
So here's the deal. To get rid of those things, they both get rid of we can get rid of either of them or both of them, because they play in part with each other by just doing something physical for half an hour. And that means if you just do push-ups or burpees or walk, actually they say walking is 70% of everything. Like if
Mm,
you just go for a walk and get that out, throw a couple hills in there, get your heart rate up, that's going to help you live longer. It is going to help you feel better at the end of the day. So I just highly recommend people take a look at that for themselves because um, in the fire service as well before that, when I was a paramedic, we had two rules on the ambulance. One was stress kills, and the other one was never be at the end of the bat. And so I explained the first one was we saw a lot of people with stress. And we saw a lot of guys in their 40s who had been jocks in their 20s and had done nothing with it. And then the 30s go by and now they're in their 40s, got a high blood pressure, diabetes, hypertension. They've got all these problems going on because they haven't addressed these things in their lives, right? They haven't found a way to blow off this adrenaline, manage this cortisol, to do these things. And so, and the other one was never be at the end of the bat. And what that really means is if you ever had somebody swinging a baseball bat at you,
uh-huh.
if you're at the end of it, you're about to take the worst impact. But
Right.
sometimes
Right.
if you just step in, you're where he's swinging from. And there's not nearly the same impact. So don't be at the end of a punch. Don't be at the end of a kick. Be either out of the range or be so close to them, they have no power, right? Unless I guess they're Bruce Lee. He had that 3-inch punch. I don't worry about that with too many people. But those were things those were our rules, right? We're pretty simple dudes, but we saw a lot of stress. And I think that's something we need to manage better.
Dude, I love the don't be at the end of the bat. Definitely gonna use that one at some point. I love that. Yeah. And right now, the world's kind of an interesting place. It always is, but there's always different factors going on. So, uh, push-ups, walk if you can. Like whenever my family does a walk, we all go together and we have great conversations. We have fun. If you have the opportunity to do that, do it. It's a twofer, you know? It's time with your family, your kids, you're showing them the importance and with them, and you're getting your 70% of everything out of that. So, well, with the I know we've got, just a couple minutes left here, so I'm curious kind of if you would have put you on the spot, I tend to do this, but what are 3 things that you'd give to a dad that's listening that you've kind of learned, whether through your reps, your experience, um, or wherever, that you would kind of bestow on them to either encourage them or just kind of equip them, with your learnings? That's kinda what this podcast is about, is learn from those that have been there before us. So, 3 things that a dad that might be listening,
Everything.
and it's kind of it's open-ended. There's not many
Yeah.
rules here.
The first thing is that it listen to your kids. Really listen to them. Ask them once a year, what does dad do wrong? And be willing to not answer back to what they tell you. They're going to tell you some things that you may not want to hear, but if you debate them, they'll never tell you it again. Listen, really take a listen. And then as you listen, try and figure out what they really like. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus in this moment. My last name is Ferry. In the 1980s, when I grew up, being a fairy was a different deal than it is today. My son, I pushed into wrestling because I got picked on and at times in fights and stuff because I won't use all the other words that they would tie on to fairy at the
Mhm.
time, but they weren't encouraging or a blessing to me. Um, and
Right.
um, and it made me probably a little meaner at times than I needed to be.
Mm,
It made me angrier at times, a lot of times I needed to be. But what that made me do as a dad was I didn't want my son to ever deal with that. So I put him in wrestling at a young age because I knew if he could wrestle and fight, he would never have to deal with what I dealt with.
mm,
And so we did a lot of different wrestling and fighting stuff. And the problem now I look back is I think there were other things he would have probably rather done. And I
mm,
wonder, had I left him to do what he had loved to do, what would his life have looked like? So not that he's mad at me for what I did, but just be aware of, is this your dream or their dream? I think
mm,
that's a hard one for us as dads because, especially with our sons, we want them to be. I mean, I want my son to be a man's man, right? I wanted him to be like me, probably is exactly what I'd probably say. So just be really aware of yourself in that space.
mhm.
Um,
Can I before you go to number 2, it sounds
yeah.
like what I've not ever thought about it this way, but it sounds like doing, like, an annual review with your kids. And
Yes.
I mean, it's, "Hey, what's worked for you?" And maybe not structured in that way, but what do you like? What don't you like? What would you change? How am I doing? Here's how I think you're doing, and let's set some goals and move forward.
Yeah. It's funny when my son was like 4 or 5, I did this for the first time. I'm like, what do you not like about daddy? And one of the things he goes, you leave me. And I'm like,
Mm.
what do you mean I leave you? When I'm in the car, you leave me. And what he's doing is pointing at me when I'm going to the ATM, right? Back when we used the ATM. And so I'm like, so he just simply wanted to walk over to the ATM with me and put the card in. Like it's sometimes the stuff is just bizarrely simple and sometimes it's not, right?
Right.
And sometimes it's really difficult as they get older. Um, let's see. What else would I tell you? Um, from where I am now with kids that are in their 20s, I would tell you because I'm trying to tell myself on a daily basis sometimes, just because they're not choosing your values doesn't mean they don't know your values.
Mm,
Um, we raise our kid. My brother said this to me, and my brother Mark is an amazing man. And he said, Chuck, do you think if you gave your kids a pop quiz on your values that they would pass? I'm like, oh yeah, they know exactly what I stand for. He goes, the difference is they haven't made them their values. And that's the difference. I don't know how to force our values on our kids. There's part of me that wishes I could have more. And there are probably people out there that think I was weak in some way. And maybe I was. I tried to instill a very Christian value set on my children. Um, and it may not play out in their 20s the way you want it to.
mm,
And that's not your fault. So give yourself some grace. We all are struggling. Most of us are fighting to work jobs, build businesses, love our kids, play with them enough, be there enough. Please show yourself some grace. We know you're trying. Any dad that sits in a room with a bunch of other dads who are trying to raise kids well, dude, that group of dads should be commended. We don't commend you guys enough. So from me to you guys who are raising kids right now, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the next generation. We need them.
Awesome.
And we appreciate all the work that you're doing to make it happen. We know it's not easy. I've been there. Um, the last thing I would say is vacation together. Be careful, mom and dad, taking vacations without your kids. We did a yearly trip to a place called Shaver Lake. Now, don't go there because it's already too populated. So just stay out of my lane. But we did a yearly trip to Shaver Lake, and my kids to this day love Shaver Lake. And they know it like the back of their hands. So we can all go up there and they can just go every direction they want to. And I don't have to worry about things because I know they know their way around the lake. And so I would just tell you guys that would be my last big thing I think I'd land on is just spend time together. Find some, it doesn't have to be an exotic vacation. It just has to be time without an agenda, without a bunch of other stuff that's in your head. Uh, go on vacation with them and play with them. That's really 90% of the time, that's all they want.
Well, your son said it. You know, what don't you like? You leave me, right? So it's time. It's time. And that theme has come up quite a bit. But it can never get to a point where we don't need to be reminded, I think, as we get busy and we're after it. Whatever you're chasing after, we only have so much time. And you're further along, right? You're further along and have seen that. And now you have the opportunity to work with some of your family, but however many years before they turn into teenagers, right? And then that I would imagine the time changes some. So if you've
It,
got some 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, like dive in. I'm at the 8 is the eldest for me right now. And it's a blast. And I'm forcing my values of baseball onto him and trying to switch from soccer to baseball just because, I've had 5 years as coach with soccer and I'm like, "Right, let's go back to baseball. Don't go it alone. We got a whole group of people here. If you're looking for some people, just holler at me. We got people from all over the country. Don't go it alone, whatever the stuff you're facing. So, uh, Chuck, we've had lots of conversations like over the last couple weeks, and every one of them is always. I'm writing my notes here, and I've got another
it's,
notepad, and it's just fun. So I appreciate you taking the time and joining me on the Skill Dad podcast, and yeah, thank you. It's been a great conversation.
it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Zach, for having me.
Absolutely. Guys and gals, for those that are listening, because I know both do, go check out Chuck's company. They're doing awesome things. Forcibleentry.com. And if you know some firefighter friends, tell them about him. Clearly, you can hear the passion. You can hear some of his story and the authority that he carries with what he's doing and why he's doing it and what he's learned. And this literally is saving lives, both first responders and those that they're going and helping. So go check them out, and see the good things that they're doing and pass it on. I'm so glad that you joined this podcast. If you made it to the end of it, well done and thank you. And I hope that you took away some great tips that you can take and apply to your life on your journey to becoming the skilled dad. You can check out all of the socials at skilled dad. But the most important thing is if you got a friend that you know could maybe benefit from Chuck's story or any other stories that we've got here, that's what we're here for. If there's any questions I can answer, you can always email Zach at skilleddad.com. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. You're listening to The Skilled Dad.